The Senate will come to order. Mr. Carpenter, please call the roll.
Senators Bridges, Cook, Coram, Crowder, Danielson,
Here.
Donovan, Finberg, Fields, Foote, Gardner, Janal, Gonzalez, Hanson, Hill,
Excused.
Icy, Holbert, Lee,
Here.
Lundeen, Marble, Moreno, Pedersen, Priola, Rankin, Rodriguez, Scott, Smallwood, Sonnenberg, Story, Tate, Todd, Williams,
Present.
Winter, Woodward, Zenzinger. Mr. President,
Here. With 34 present, 0 absent, and 1 excused, we have a quorum. Members and guests, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. Approval of the journal. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the reading of the Journal of Monday, June 1st, 2020 be dispensed with and that the journal be approved as corrected by the Secretary.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Senate Services.
correctly printed, Senate Bill 211 and 212, Senate Concurrent Resolution 1, Senate General Resolution 21, correctly engrossed, Senate Bill 206 and 208, correctly engrossed, Senate Bill 935, 118, 194, correctly revised, House Bill 1153, correctly revised, House Bill 1127, 1135, 1201, 1214, 1236, 1281, 1345.
Committee reports.
June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1001 be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1003 be amended as follows. As so amended, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. Recommendation placed on the consent calendar. June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1022 be amended as follows. As so amended, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. Recommendation placed on the consent calendar. June 2nd, 2020. Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1032 be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. Recommendation placed on the consent calendar. June 2nd, 2020. Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1061 be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. June 2nd, 2020. Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1082 be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. Recommendation placed on the consent calendar. June 2nd, 2020. Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1116 be amended as follows. As so amended, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. Recommendation placed on the consent calendar. June 2nd, 2020. Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1183 be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. June 2nd, 2020. Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1196 be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. June 2nd, 2020. Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1206 be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. Recommendation placed on the consent calendar. June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1208 be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. Recommendation placed on the consent calendar. June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1209 be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. Recommendation placed on the consent calendar. June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1210 be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1212 be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1215 be amended as follows. As so amended, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1216 be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. Recommendation placed on the consent calendar. June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. House Bill 1230 be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. Recommendation placed on the consent calendar. June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 28 be amended as follows. As so amended, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 158 be amended as follows. As so amended, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation. Recommendation placed on the consent calendar. June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of Mayor's Committee following, Senate Bill 170 be referred to Committee Whole. The favorable recommendation, June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of Mayor's Committee following, Senate Bill 181 be amended as follows. As so amended, be referred to Committee Whole. The favorable recommendation, June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of Mayor's Committee following, Senate Bill 186 be referred to Committee Whole. The favorable recommendation placed on the consent calendar. June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of Mayor's Committee recommends the following. Senate Bill 197 be amended as follows. As so amended, be referred to Committee Whole. The favorable recommendation placed on the consent calendar. June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of Mayor's Committee following, Senate Bill 201 be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation placed on the consent calendar. June 2nd, 2020, Committee on Appropriations. After consideration of Mayor's Committee following, Senate Bill 204 be amended as follows. As so amended, be referred to Committee of the Whole with a favorable recommendation.
Third reading of bills, consent calendar. Third reading of bills, consent calendar. Mr. Carpenter, please read all the titles on the third reading of bills, consent calendar.
Senate Bill 206 by Senators Todd and Cook and Representative Landgraf and Singer concerning clarification disqualifying a recipient from participating in a public assistance program when the recipient is found to have committed an intentional violation of the program. Senate Bill 208 by Senators Story and Corman, Representatives Cutter and Duran concerning the extension of the period of time the voluntary contributions that are set to expire in 2020 will appear in the state individual tax return form.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the passage of all the bills on the third reading of bills consent calendar, which includes Senate Bill 206 and Senate Bill 208.
Is there any discussion on any of the bills? Senator Marble.
Thank you so very much, Mr. President. I apologize to everybody in this legislative body this morning. I just want to explain, this did come through State Veterans and Military Affairs, and I was a yes. And after looking at it more clearly, I would like to state that I do have some questions and concerns regarding a person who fraudulently comes in and is participating in a public assistance program. Well, they should be taken out of all those the programs that they are in until they have been investigated fully to make sure that they have not also fraudulently been part of others. And it just has come to say if there's one, then maybe all of them should be looked at. And just to scrutinize it, because it is taxpayer money that is paying for these programs, and it's so important to protect that. So I do have a real problem if someone has fraudulently become a part of a public assistance program and they are in others. I think they ought to be looked at in all of those and taken out until they have been found to have done it legally and according to all of the specified qualifications necessary to be in those programs. So I will be a no, just to look at them a little bit more clearly. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the motion is the passage of all the bills on the third reading of bills consent calendar. Are there any no votes on any of the bills on the third reading consent calendar? Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to be recorded as a no vote on Senate Bill 206.
Senator Marble will be recorded as a no vote on Senate Bill 206. Senator Woodward.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too would like to be recorded as a no vote on Senate Bill 206.
Senator Woodward will be recorded as a no vote on Senate Bill 206. With 32 ayes, 2 no votes, 0 absent, 1 excused, Senate Bill 206 is passed. Co-sponsors. Senators Moreno, Donovan, Scott, with 34 ayes, 0 no, 0 absent, 1 excused, Senate Bill 208 is passed. Co-sponsors. Senators Moreno, Gonzalez, Bridges, Crowder, Priola, Todd, third reading of bills, final passage. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to House Bill 1153.
House Bill 1153 by Representative Esgar and Senators Garcia and Pedersen concerning the relationship between state employees and the state as their employer and in connection with creating the Colorado Partnership for Quality Jobs and Services Act and making an appropriation.
Senator Pedersen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move House Bill 1153 on third reading and final passage.
Is there any discussion? Senator Gardner.
It's okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, colleagues, people of Colorado, we had a robust, vigorous discussion on this bill yesterday. And the limitations of time in our rules, which of course could be changed by a majority vote apparently, prohibit us from having an equally robust discussion. So I will confine my remarks this morning to the reason or reasons that this bill, while perhaps well-intended, is wrong-headed. The reason and basis for non-unionization of public employees is long. It is well-founded. It is not found in its basis on the conservative side of the aisle, but on the liberal side of the aisle, frankly. The debate about this dates back to the important labor debates of the 1920s and 30s. And in fact, in 1937 or thereabouts, there was much discussion about whether or not federal public employees should be able to unionize, as this bill will do for our state employees. And the liberal icon, if you will, Franklin Roosevelt had quite a bit to say about it. In opposition, mind you. Now, first of all, as the debate yesterday noted, President Roosevelt recognized, and he wrote in a letter to the president of one of the leading unions, he said, "The desire of government employees for fair and adequate pay, reasonable hours of work, safe and suitable working conditions, development of opportunities for advancement, facilities for fair and impartial consideration and review of grievances, and other objectives of a proper employee relations policy is basically no different from that of employees in private industry. I agree with President Roosevelt. He goes on to say in his letter, organization on their part to present their views on such matters is both natural and logical, but meticulous attention should be paid to the special relationships and obligations of public servants to the public itself and to the government. I agree with President Roosevelt. He says, all government employees should realize that the process of collective bargaining, as usually understood, cannot be transplanted into the public service. It has its distinct and insurmountable limitations when applied to public personnel management. The very nature and purposes of government make it impossible for administrative officials to represent fully or to bind the employer in mutual discussions with the government employee organizations. The employer is the whole people. The whole people who speak by means of laws enacted by their representatives, in this case, Congress, in our case, this General Assembly. President Roosevelt says, accordingly, administrative officials and employees alike are governed and guided, and in many instances restricted by laws which establish policies, procedures, or rules in personnel matters. Upon employees in the government service rests the obligation to serve the whole people, whose interests and welfare require orderliness and continuity in the conduct of government activities. This obligation is paramount, since their own services have to do with the functioning of the government. A strike of public employees manifests nothing less than an intent on their part to prevent or obstruct the operations of government until their demands are satisfied. Now, members, I will note to you that the current bill prohibits strikes, but so do all of those other 34 states that were cited to us. And yet, in many of them, there are stoppages, there are slowdowns, there are demonstrations, there are threats. The very institution of collective bargaining by public employees creates the potential and probability that such concerted activity on the part of our state employees will occur. Early in the labor movement in this country, President Franklin Roosevelt recognized that. A champion of the labor movement at the height of the Great Depression. And yet he recognized, in a crisis not unlike our own, except several orders of magnitude more, that government employees should not be allowed to unionize. This is a union bill, members. It alters the relationship between we, the people, the employers, and our employees. It alters it in a fundamental way that no less than President Franklin Roosevelt recognized was impossible to properly administer. People of Colorado today, this chamber will vote on whether or not to allow unionization and collective bargaining by your employees. This chamber was offered an opportunity to put that to a vote of you, the people, and failed to do so, declined to do so, refused to do so. In the future, when we find ourselves hostage to our employees, and I don't believe that they are anything less than good and great employees, but they are people like we. In the future, when we find ourselves with the threat that somehow by work stoppage, something short of a strike, something that can't be legally pursued, I just encourage you, the people of Colorado, to look to the members of this chamber and our sister chamber and find who thought that was a good idea to change that relationship. I ask for a no vote.
Senator Zenzinger, followed by Senator Lundin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to talk a little bit today about a different liberal icon. That would be Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King gave a speech in 1961. I'm going to read just a short passage here from this speech. You're going to recognize some phrases in this speech. A lot of what he says here, he has echoed or repeated in other more famous speeches. He says, differences have been contrived to impose disunity by dividing brothers because the color of their skin has a different shade. I look forward confidently to the day when all who work for a living will be one with no thought to their separateness as Negroes, Jews, Italians, or any other distinctions. This will be the day when we shall bring into full realization the American dream, a dream yet unfulfilled, a dream of equality of opportunity, of privilege, and properly widely distributed. A dream of a land where men will not take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few. A dream of a land where men will not argue that the color of a man's skin determines the content of his character. A dream of a nation where all of our gifts and resources are held not for ourselves alone, but as instruments of service for the rest of humanity. The dream of a country where every man will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. That is the dream. He gave this speech at the AFL-CIO National Convention. He gave this speech to his brothers and sisters of labor at the convention in Miami in 1961. Now this book that I'm holding here is a book of speeches that Dr. Martin Luther King has delivered, but they're not the speeches that you probably are aware of. These are his speeches on labor. This book is called All Labor Has Dignity, and that's pulled from one of his speeches, his second to last speech that he gave 1 month before he died, 1 month before he was assassinated. He started speaking about labor and the importance of supporting our workers early on. One of his first speeches was called A Look to the Future, that was given in 1957, where he talked about it. In 1959, he gave a speech to the Christian Leadership Conference in defense of the United Packing House Workers Union of America. And in that speech, he talked about it as a dark day indeed when men cannot work to implement the ideal of brotherhood. In 1961, he gave a speech to the United Automobile Workers Union. In 1961, later that year, in December, he gave a speech to the AFL-CIO at their 4th Constitutional Convention. In 1962, he gave a speech to the United Packing House Workers of America, the Workers Union of America, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. In Minneapolis, in which he said, quote, "I am in one of those houses of labor to which I come not to criticize but to praise." In 1962, he gave a speech to the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union in Monticello, New York, where he talked about, quote, "There are 3 major social evils: the evil of war, the evil of economic injustice, and the evil of racial injustice." In 1962, he gave a speech to the National Maritime Union Americana in New York, in which he talked about how industry knows only 2 types of workers who in years past were brought frequently to their jobs in chains. And he talked about how important it was to stand in solidarity with our workers. He gave a speech, it was a civil rights speech, in 1963 in the Union Hall in Detroit, Michigan, where he talked about how now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. And he gave that speech to his union brothers and sisters. He talked to the RWDSU in Madison Square Garden in New York about the unresolved race question and how it's connected to the worker. He gave a speech in 1965 talking about the explosion in Watts and reminded all of us that the northern ghettos are the prisons of forgotten men, and how important it was that we rise up and demand justice for those workers. He gave a speech in 1965 at the AFL-CIO convention where he said, "Labor cannot stand still long or it will slip backward." Speech after speech after speech, all the way up until Memphis, Tennessee, March 18th of 1968. The background of this speech is that he traveled all across the country in promoting the Poor People's Campaign. And a civil rights strike broke out in Memphis, Tennessee, because on February 12th, 1968, some 1,300 black men walked away from their jobs. Their jobs were picking up garbage for the city. 2 men, Ethel Cole, 36, and Robert Walker, 30, had been crushed to death by a defective packing mechanism on a truck in a city that refused to spend the money to update its equipment. These were municipal workers working for government, leaving their families with no insurance or even workman's compensation. And these workers worked in terrible conditions. They were sent home with no pay when it rained, and they made them work extra hours without pay when it didn't. They worked in filth. They had nowhere to clean up. They suffered terrible injuries. Working full-time jobs, these black sanitation workers lived in poverty. They couldn't adequately feed their families. They felt that union rights and recognition, dues checkoff, and some degree of job security provided the only solution, but the city wasn't having it. The city would not allow them to unionize. And when the workers tried to reason with the city council, the police attacked them and their supporters with this chemical called mace. And so Dr. Martin Luther King traveled across the country, and he stood by these workers, and he gave a speech, his second to last speech, before he died, 1 month earlier. That speech was given to the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME. And in this speech, he answered that question, the question that we asked yesterday during our debate. We were asked time and time again, why now? Now is not the time. We've got so much going on. Now is not the time for this. We can't afford this. Let's just wait.
Would
Yes,
would the good senator from Jefferson County like to be extended to your next 10 minutes?
I would. Thank you, Mr. President.
Continue, Senator.
And so he said, quote, "And so in Memphis we have begun. We are saying, now is the time. Get the word across to everybody in power in this time, in this town, that now is the time to make the real promises of democracy. Now is the time to make an adequate income a reality for all of God's children. Now is the time for City Hall to take a position for that which is just and honest. Now is the time for justice to roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Now is the time." And he said that after he chronicled all of the work that they had been doing all across the country, fighting civil rights battles, desegregating lunch counters, desegregating buses and schools. He talked about the freedom riders. He talked about how important it was that they desegregate interstate travel. He talked about voting rights. And he said that all of those things have led up to this moment where we need to be demanding justice for labor, for the worker. And why? Why? He says that now our struggle is for genuine equality, which means economic equality. At the end of that speech, it was quite surprising because when he wrote this speech, he did not set out to call for a strike. By the end of it, he had rallied sufficiently an entire city, an entire nation of workers to his cause. And at the end of the speech, he told the members, the workers of Memphis, that he would be back. He would be back to stand with them. And he kept his promise. 3 weeks later, in Memphis, Tennessee, on April 3rd, he came back and delivered his last speech. And that last speech was to AFSCME. And it was the speech in which he was killed for. He died the next day, assassinated. And people like to think that it was because he stood for civil rights, and it was because he stood for freeing the African American people, but it was linked inextricably to labor and the struggle. And in that last speech, he talked about how all labor has dignity. That's what this bill is about. This bill is about affording rights to our state workers, giving them a voice so that they can advocate for their working conditions. And just because they are state workers and they work for the public should not mean that they have become indentured servants. They are public servants who are doing a job, and they deserve a voice. And they deserve us to pass this bill.
Senator Lundin.
Thank you, Madam President. We begin in agreement. All labor has dignity. 100% agreement with that statement. The bulk of the previous speaker's presentation dealt with the right to gather together, form a union, and collectively bargain in the private sector. Although at times I'm uncomfortable with that, I see that as a fair calculus. This bill, however, has nothing to do with that. This bill is about a very different economic proposition with a significant number of different economic motivations, consequences, and realities. This bill represents a fundamental shift for Colorado. It is a significant taking, a taking of the power and authority of the people of Colorado, shifting it away from them. Now, whether you shop at Whole Foods or Sportsman's Warehouse, whether you drive a tractor at work or drive a Prius to work, whether you would prefer smaller government or just wish that government was smarter and better at its job, good folks of Colorado, your ability to enforce that perspective on the government that is your government, presumably of the people and for the people and by the people, this bill diminishes your ability, good folks of Colorado, of enforcing that perspective. Now, I encourage you all to listen. You can hear it if you focus. That is the sound of the General Assembly days away, hopefully, from sine die. Now, you know what that normally sounds like. It's a cacophony. It's pandemonium. It's chaos at times. Listen to that cacophony. Listen to that pandemonium. Listen to that chaos. That, Mr. and Ms. Colorado taxpayer, is the sound of inevitability. That's the sound of a larger and more costly government. And it happens at a time when the voters, the people of Colorado, have been told, you're welcome, but please, for your own health and the health of others, stay away. And what happens for you or to you, you'll find out about it later. You heard me argue yesterday, and I'll argue again now, from a perspective of all labor has dignity, that now is not the time. Why is that so? Here's why. This idea that all labor has dignity is rooted in the concept of domain. I trade my time, I pour my life into my work. I give of myself, and what I get out of that effort is my domain. It is my dignity. And that is why we stand together in that root concept. But as we discussed yesterday, today, across our state, the people that this bill seeks to favor are under the least amount of pressure of any of the sectors or labor groups in the state. There are, between March 1st and April 25th, 2,000 government employees across all sectors of government, local, state, federal, et cetera, within the state of Colorado, that have sought unemployment claims, less than 0.5% of that particular labor group. Meanwhile, the good folks who labor and have the dignity that they deserve from their works in arts and entertainment and recreation, almost 29% of them, 28% of them, are seeking favor. Accommodations and food services, 22%, versus the group this bill seeks to favor, less than 0.5%. And as I went into length yesterday and could go again today, there are 18 sectors and labor groups. The working people of Colorado, who at the end of the day have to pay for what comes from this bill, all of those sectors are under more pressure than the group that this bill seeks to favor. And that's not to diminish the group that this bill seeks to favor. But the reality is, now is clearly not the time. And we need to have a significant debate about whether public employee unions, which is what this bill creates, is the right thing to do. But clearly, not in this context, not at this time. Currently, public employees have an association, and they do advocate. They advocate effectively. They know this game. They know the business and the process of budgeting in government. They know the pressure points. They know how to establish the relationships. They have advantage already that all of those other labor groups that we discussed do not have. And all those other labor groups, the people of Colorado, are the ones who are going to pay the cost of an ever-expanding, ever more costly government, as this bill will drive. Bottom line, it uses the people's money potentially against the people's own best interest. I mean, it's obvious on its face. The bill hires 15 new public employees in the first year to do the work of advocating on behalf of public employees, facilitate that process. 47 people in the second year. It is government growing government for the sake of government. Now, we had two really meaningful debates, subsets of the debate yesterday, where we could have gotten this thing to veer back on course, perhaps. One that would have honored the people by saying to the people, you have the right to raise your hand within 90 days of signature and object to this, and it will go to the ballot, and it will be reconsidered more closely, more completely by the people. The people who shop at Whole Foods or Sportsman Warehouse, who may drive a tractor at work or a Prius to work. It would have given them the opportunity to say, got it, sorry I missed the debate. I heard you guys are closed down. Oh, no, you weren't. Seemed like it. was awfully quiet down there when you rammed the thing through. Public wasn't very involved. But now we know what's going on, and we'd like to have an opportunity to participate. But no, the majority party politicians said with a SWAT, nope, can't put that in this bill. Wouldn't want to risk the people actually raising their hand, speaking up, engaging on something we've already settled on their behalf. Second really challenging part of the debate centered around politics and the money that supports political operations. An amendment was offered to say, you know what, let's not sully this bill with that. Let's make sure that this bill isn't about politics. Now, we've seen it across the nation. We see it in our own state with other public unions and how they spend their contributions. They never spend their political contributions to make government smaller. Never. They always spend their political contributions to make government bigger. Because when you're in government, you want more government. That's just the way it works. So we offer up an amendment that says, take that off the table. Let's make sure this is clean. It's about taking care of labor, which has dignity. What happens? In a moment of raw political power, the amendment is swatted away, not with a vote, but with a ruling. Yeah, not really what we're talking about. Not able to include that. Yes, please extend.
Would the good senator
President.
from
Monument.
Monument like to use your next 10 minutes?
I would, please, Madam President. Thank you so very much.
Please proceed.
Courtesy. So swatted away, not voted away, swatted away a movement of political power. So we stand here in a quiet building. Jiminy Christmas, it's amazing how quiet it is. With little, if any, meaningful public engagement at this point in the process, certainly. Having told the public, yeah, I know the normal course of business gives you a right to say no, raise your hand, put it on the ballot, take it away. We're not even going to let you have that. In a time when they're not even in the building. So, this bill is going to move ahead. I do not think it is good public policy. I think now is absolutely not the time when other labor groups who strive and struggle and work and sweat and cry when they can't pay the bills and will be asked to pay the cost of ever-expanding government as they do that. Now is not the time to do this. We should have a debate about it, but not today. But it seems to be moving with every single member in this building of the majority party politicians signed up on the bill, and nothing but voices of opposition from the minority party on behalf of the individuals across Colorado, saying, no, wait, stop, consider, adjust. All those arguments and efforts being swatted away. I urge us all to reconsider. I urge us to come together on behalf of the people of Colorado struggling under an enormous burden right now and say, you don't need one more cost. You don't need one more burden. House Bill 1153 is not going to advance today. I urge your opposition to House Bill 1153. Madam President, thank you very much for your attention.
Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, a prior speaker called this a union bill. So let me start with a point of agreement. This is a union bill. The difference is I say that with pride rather than shame. I'm one of the few members, maybe the only, of this chamber to have already voted to extend collective bargaining rights to public employees. When I was a member of the City Council in Commerce City, and our workers are now the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Local 1144. I take pride in that. It feels like I am reliving this debate all over again from when I was on the City Council, because some of my fellow City Councilors at the time also tried to send this issue to voters. We're not qualified, we're not capable of extending collective bargaining rights to our own employees. Send it to voters, let them decide. That failed, and guess what? The world didn't end. Workers and management worked together to create a better workplace for all public employees. Commerce City, just like the state budget, will be facing a budget shortfall. The difference is that those now collectively bargained employees don't come to management with unreasonable expectations in those environments. Instead, they come to management with solutions. Here's how we can make things more efficient, more fair. Here's what we're willing to put on the table. That is what happens in these environments. Let me say very clearly and definitively that collective bargaining, in my view, is a human right. It is a basic workplace right. And it should never, the rights of people should never be subject to a vote by the masses. That should never happen. This bill still has a little ways to go, but I'm confident that the governor will sign it. So to those state employees, I want to say thank you for your commitment to public service, and I want to congratulate you on this big step towards having, finally, a voice in the workplace.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam President. I join my colleagues in asking for a no vote on House Bill 1153. I've been working around this building, in and around this building now for about 18 years. And in that time, I have seen and heard people in Colorado advocate for change. One of the changes that happened before my time here in this Capitol, and that was term limits. I think that was 93 or so, it was early 1990s. The people stood up and said, we don't want career politicians. And I voted yes on that. We've seen term limits. We've seen reform in campaign finance. We've seen reform in lobbyist restrictions. We've seen reform after reform. A balanced budget amendment is one thing that people I hear constantly wanting at the federal level, and almost never do they say, gosh, it works so well here in Colorado, we need that at the federal level. But cumulatively, these changes have reduced the voice of the representative legislature, and people, like me included, have often voted for such change. But the result of those changes has been that employees of our state government have had vastly more sway. The prior speaker from El Paso County, I agree with him. The state workers who will be included in this union, they know this process. They know this building. They know us. They help some of us get here. They help achieve majorities. They help win statewide races. And that's their constitutional right. We had that debate yesterday. But now, with a diminished voice of the people here in the legislature, having diminished opportunity to have people who might be statesmen or stateswomen to learn this process, to really understand how the budget works, how our state government works, The people, their representatives here in this body, have a reduced, a term-limited ability to have that expertise. But meanwhile, the population of people who have been here longer, who are almost impossible to fire or lay off, I'm not saying impossible, but darn near, now they're going to have an even greater voice. Not just here in the legislature, but down on the first floor and in campaigns for all of the seats that are here in this building. Similar to how public employees have, I think, an unlevel advantage, a greater voice in school districts all over this state. No, it's not taxpayer money once it gets to a paycheck. But if you look at the number one or maybe number two most prolific funding source in campaigns, hard money contributions to candidates for people who occupy seats in this building, either on the second floor or the first, it's small donor committees. That debate took place when small donor committees were created in Colorado. It took place in prior legislation, and it's taking place now. A government of, by, and for the people in Colorado, through legislation like this, turns subsets of the people into people of, by, and for the government. That small collection of people now will have a greater voice, a greater influence over all of the people of Colorado. Give us more of your money. Expect less representative voice in your legislature. Take that balance away and skew it more in one direction. That's what this bill is. Ask for a no vote on House Bill 1153.
Senator Bridges.
Thank you, Madam President. I have rarely been accused of voting for a bill for purely political motives. And that is what I am hearing repeatedly from folks who sit on this side of the aisle about this bill. And so let me be really, really clear. If you think that I can be bought for a $400 contribution from an individual or a $5,000 contribution from a small donor committee, which is made up, by the way, of $50 contributions from a lot of individual people, then that says a whole lot more about you and your values than it does about me. This is not about politics. This is about people. We had someone yesterday say we should put the people ahead of the government. That is exactly what this bill does. This bill empowers people to get better benefits, to get better wages, to be better off because we are passing this bill. And that, friends, colleagues, that is why I am voting for this bill. Not for some craven political reason, and frankly, that's pretty darn offensive. I'm voting for this bill because it helps the people of Colorado. Not because it'll put more money in some bank account to try and stack the deck here in the legislature. That is absurd. That is offensive. Let's concentrate on the policy here. Let's concentrate on the people. Let's concentrate on what this bill does for Colorado. I urge an aye vote.
Senator Crowder.
Thank you, Madam. You know, I wasn't even going to speak on this. I've been in 2 unions, and I have no problem with the union. The problem with this bill is the $8 million price tag. I asked the question when I was here yesterday, how are you going to pay for it? Then I find out it's a COVID hero fund. Well, the reality is if we're going to cut $740 million out of the state educational budget, and this is going to cost over $8 million over the next 2 years, I'm a little bit aghast at how our thought process is. The reality is, if there's going to be a union, let the union members pay for this amount. I don't know why it is. I don't even know why this is part of this. You know, I understand that there should be amount of state money that is withdrawn from paychecks, and that needs to be administered by the state. But the reality is, I don't understand why it's so high of a physical note. So I object to people coming down here saying the reason, you know, we're against this is strictly because of who knows what the previous speaker was talking about. I don't. But the reality is, these are tough economical times. And I think what you need to do is, I don't know how we can rely on this COVID hero fund that's supposed to be transmitted to the state coffers from the treasurer's office. That fund was for a specified reason. So I question I don't question the intent of the bill to be a unionized. I question the bill how to pay for it during this time. If in fact, because you take the teachers union, which you are a part of, I'm sure. The teachers union is self-sufficient. They pay their dues. Part of those dues goes to pay for the administration of the state. So, you know, I have a problem wondering why this can't be done the same method. But I will be a no vote on this until those answers are cleared up. But don't say that we're anti-people because of this. What we are, our priorities are more with education, transportation, etc. It's a question of how to spend the money. Thank you.
Senator Gardner. Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, colleagues, I had not thought I would return to the well, but I must say some of the debate puzzles me. People take offense that someone might imply that this bill is about politics. Well, methinks thou dost protest too much. They say it's about people. Well, I hold elected office, and what we do is all about politics, and politics is all about people. Which people? Whose constituents? Now, even though I don't have any wealthy relatives, I can't be bought for $400 either because I'm too close to the grave. But my constituents are people who pay taxes to the state, the revenues of which make up the budget of our state. And this bill involves a set of people, our state employees, who, like Franklin Roosevelt says, have the same interest in pay and benefits and everything that every private sector worker does as well. And they want more of that. I don't blame them. I got news for you. A simple country lawyer would charge more for his hourly rate if his clients could pay it. Because that's the nature of people, although I probably then give away a lot more pro bono work than I do. My point being, this is a bill about how our state will budget and what that process will look like. As the senator from Douglas County talked about, public employees, state employees, they know this process really well already. They have an association already. It lobbies for them quite effectively already. If their association or associations want to deny that they're being effective, okay, I won't argue with them, but I think they've been very effective. And they will continue to be, and they will appear at the Joint Budget Committee. And they will find constitutionally protected ways to contribute to many of our members here. You can look at my contributions and you'll find that there wasn't any danger of them buying me. I don't seem to get contributions from them. Point of pride. Because of where I come from on the spectrum, if you will. This is a bill about what you believe is the proper role of collective bargaining and whether it has any place in public employment. The senator from Commerce City, I appreciate his remarks and his candor and his thoughtful remarks. We disagree. But they were thoughtful. House Bill 1153 will create collective bargaining, it will create unionization, and it will create the very large possibility and probability that our constituents, the people of Colorado at large, not just some set of them, but the people of Colorado at large, will be held hostage, as will their budget, to one particular group of people who will have a very special way to get to our resources. I don't blame them. I don't think that they're bad people. I don't even think they're bad people to want to engage in collective bargaining because it will increase their power. Who wouldn't do that? But I question the wisdom of this General Assembly, and if, or perhaps when this bill passes and it finds its way to the first floor, an executive that would sign such a bill, surrendering a large amount of prerogative of the people of Colorado and us and the executive as their representative. And for that reason, I ask for a no vote.
Senator Pedersen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members, for the conversation and debate around this bill. I want to thank the advocates who have never given up on fighting for our employees here in Colorado. For over a decade, they've come together through the executive order to actually have a voice at the table. But what this does is it codifies that executive order that no matter who is our governor in the future, that our state employees are represented. It also ensures a collective voice, that there is representation, that there's a democratic process through this union to ensure that the people on the ground who are doing this work can not only advocate in good times for benefits and better pay and a better workplace, a safer workplace, but also in bad times. We saw during the recession how employees came together to try to step up and take a pay reduction in the difficult times. They didn't see raises for years. And now we are facing an even deeper cuts. To say that state employees are somehow the least affected right now could not be further from the truth. We have seen $57.8 million reduced in the current budget for personnel for our state services. $57.8 million. These are also the people who have had to step up in the most difficult time in Colorado through a pandemic and show up every day to work, wondering if they are going to be sick, if they're going to bring it home to their families, but not having the option of working from home. In fact, it's the nurses that are providing testing during the pandemic to keep our communities safe. It's the people who are providing nursing home care for our veterans. It's the people who are working in our Department of Corrections, where some of the greatest outbreaks have happened. They are also the people who have had to step up in unprecedented ways to deal with the unemployment claims. We rely on them in the good and in the bad times. This is not about politics. This is about ensuring that we are not just saying we value you and that we care about your work and thanking them. Those are empty words. This is about saying we value you. You deserve to have a voice. And we are not going to just say it, we're going to show it. This has been a very long process. As you remember, this started in the beginning of the session in the House, and we actually heard this in committee before we all took a break to come back when it was safer. This is not shoving a piece of policy through. In fact, they have been told time and time again, year after year, wait, it's not the right time. Last year, they were told, wait, it's not the right time. And so while we're having the debate on, is this the right time now, it could not be more important with the time that we're facing. Who better to come to the table to talk about how to make our government more efficient, how to make our workplaces more safe than the people who are on the ground doing this work currently. So let's not say with empty words that we appreciate them. Let's ensure that they have a voice, that we value their experience and perspective, and also recognizing that this is, we heard about workforce trying to force a negotiation through stopping the workforce stoppage. That's actually in the bill. They can't do that, and there's disciplinary action. So you can't go on strike, you can't stop the vital state services. This is truly a partnership. It's a partnership with the executive branch, it's a partnership with us in the legislature to ultimately appropriate the dollars that they're asking for, and it's a partnership with the employees of the state who are keeping us going, not only in the time of need in the pandemic, but also ensuring that these services continue so our businesses can thrive in recovery. So, members, it's an honor to be carrying this bill, and I ask for your support.
Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues. There is so much that you have to take into effect when you look at how we are here as elected officials and those public servants. We serve. We serve those in the private sector because they pay us. Some of the things are mandated by law that we do, but honestly, to be a public servant and then unionize to make sure that everything goes on our terms, and yes, you do have the ability to hold the people you serve hostage. Everything has to be a certain way, or it could be the possibility you won't show up to work. That's not fair. It's not fair to the people we serve. When you say that unions aren't political, I about fell out of my chair, because there's no bigger political union than the teachers' union and those in education. We see they donate to campaigns and put out mailings all the time. It's very political. Unions are like that. They lobby heavy and hard. I can't vote for House Bill 1153 because I still believe and will always believe and was brought up and born in a time where public servants were actually that. I grew up in a time of peace officers, not law enforcement, and I still believe in peace officers. Times change, but maybe we should stay back to the way the old days were, because actually things were done well, and I think we should reflect on those times past. But to unionize for a public group, I think is wrong. And I just can't be convinced in all of this debate that 1153 is the right thing to do. And therefore, especially in this time with $7 million going towards funding this at a time when we don't even have that money. And we have cut out veterans and seniors on the homestead exemption. I think we better look at our priorities and put on hold some things that are on the wish list for certain people. Because one of the things we have to look at is do no harm. And yet we are. Is this eventually going to be funded with money that should be kept in the veterans and seniors' pockets? How much is this going to grow and expand throughout time and cost the people we're supposed to serve? Mr. President and colleagues, I thank you for your time, but I also want you to know that on my side of the aisle, we are looking out for the public, and we are part of the public servants, and we understand, and we have a certain definition and principle that we carry on for serving as a public servant. The private sector needs our help. They are looking to us every day to do the right thing. They have lost much, and we can't even begin to quantify the greater loss coming down the road for them with the riots that have ensued and further shutdowns of the government. And then to reward the public sector with unionization. How are we going to reward the private sector? This is a time we should be looking at building our tax base up again. And giving 1153 a pass is really not going in that direction at all, looking out for the private sector. That should be our one and only focus, because we are public servants. And those unions are very political. So let's just agree that we cannot sweep under the rug. The private sector has been hurt deeply and greatly and probably irreparably. And for this bill to come in at this time is just wrong. The timing is not right. So please rethink and get your eyes off of us, and let's take a look at the people we serve, the private sector. They need us. Thank you.
Having no further discussion, the motion before the body is the passage of House Bill 1153 on third reading and final passage. Are there any no votes? Mr. Minority Leader, Senators Gardner, Marble, Priola, Quorum, Crowder, Woodward, Lundin, Sonnenberg, Heisey, Rankin, Tate, Scott, Cook, Smallwood. With 19 ayes, 15 no votes, 0 absent, and 1 excuse, House Bill 1153 is passed. Co-sponsors: Senators Danielson, Senator Hansen will be added as a co-sponsor.
He's on the fence.
General order, second reading of bills, consent calendar. Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole for consideration of general orders, second reading of bills, consent calendar.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. The Senate will resolve itself to the Committee of the Whole for consideration of general orders, second reading of bills, consent calendar, and Senator Zenzinger will take the chair.
The committee will come to order and the coat rule is relaxed. Will the clerk please read the title of all the bills on the general order, second reading of bills, consent calendar?
House Bill 1232 by Representatives Michael and Janae and listed Senators Todd and Pruitt concerning equity and access to clinical trials for individuals enrolled in the Medical Assistance Program. House Bill 1318 by Representatives Burden, Will, and Senator Winter concerning the electronic recording of plots of land. House Bill 1237 by Representatives Young and Sain, Senators Moreno and Sonnenberg concerning the assignment of certain children and youth to managed care service areas under the Medical Assistance Act. House Bill 1177 by Representative Arndt, Senator Tate concerning modifications to the enterprise zone status in order to address certain defects and anachronisms. House Bill 1330 by Representatives Lantina, McKean, Senators Gardner and Lee concerning modifications to the Colorado Governmental Immunity Act to clarify the status of immunity from liability that applies to the University of Colorado Hospital Authority. House Bill 1326 by Representatives Burden, Van Winkle, and Senators Lee and Gardner concerning an expansion of an individual's ability to practice an occupation in Colorado through creation of an occupational credential portability program. House Senate Bill 209 by Senators Garcia and Holbert and Representatives Becker and Neville concerning bills enacted in the second regular session of the 72nd General Assembly that include an act subject to petition clause.
Majority Leader Fenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move for the adoption of all the bills on the consent calendar, which includes House Bill 1232, 1318, 1237, 1177, 1330, 1326, and Senate Bill 209.
Is there any discussion on any of the bills on the consent calendar? The motion before the body is the adoption of all the bills on general order, second reading of bills consent calendar. All of those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and all the bills are adopted. Majority Leader Fenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move the committee rise and report.
The motion is for the committee to rise and report. All those in favor say aye. All the opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. The committee will rise and report.
The Senate will come to order. Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. President. The committee has had a number of bills under consideration. Will the clerk please read the report?
Mr. President, your committee will the report is that on consideration of the following test bills being the second reading, there makes the following recommendations thereon. Senate Bill 209 passed second reading order and gross place accounted for the reading and final passage. House Bill 1232, House Bill 1318, House Bill 1237, House Bill 1177, House Bill 1330, House Bill 1326 passed second reading order revised place accounted for the reading and final passage.
Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the report.
The motion is for the adoption of the committee of the whole report. Are there any no votes? With 34 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 1 excused, the committee of the whole report is adopted. Senate Bill 209 passed on second reading, order engrossed and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. House Bill 1232, House Bill 1318, House Bill 1237, House Bill 1177, House Bill 1330, House Bill 1326 passed on second reading, order revised and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. General order, second reading bills. Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the committee resolve itself into the committee of the whole, that the Senate...
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the Senate will resolve itself to the committee of the whole for consideration of general orders, second reading of bills, and Senator Zenzinger will take the chair.
The committee will come to order, and the coat rule is relaxed. Will the clerk please read the title to, Senator Majority Leader Fenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Senate Bills 7, 107, 55, and 51 lay over until tomorrow, June 3rd.
The motion before the body is to lay over Senate Bill 7, 55, and 51 until...
And 107.
And 107. Until when? Until tomorrow. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? The motion passes, and we will lay over those bills until tomorrow. Will the clerk please read the title to Senate Bill 29?
Senate Bill 29 by Senators Fields and Moreno and Representatives Coleman and Duran concerning
Senator
the annual
Moreno.
cost of living adjustment to the amount of basic cash assistance Colorado Works program recipient receives.
Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Senate Bill 29 and the Finance and Appropriations Committee reports.
To the Finance Report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I encourage a no vote. I ask you to reject the Finance Committee report. There are some changes that are going to be evident in second reading amendments that make the Finance Committee report obsolete.
Is there any discussion on the motion to reject the committee report? Seeing none, the motion is to reject the committee report. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. To the Appropriations Report. Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Second verse, same as the first. I ask to reject the Appropriations Committee report. There will be second reading amendments that make that report obsolete as well.
Is there any further discussion on the motion to reject the Appropriation Report? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the report is rejected. To the bill. There is an amendment on the desk. Will the clerk please read Amendment L003?
Amendment L003, Senate Bill 29 by Senator Moreno.
Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Amendment L003. Colleagues, this is an amendment that changes the legislative declaration of the bill. Originally, I was actually very excited about this bill because it provided a much needed, established a much needed cost of living adjustment for the basic cash assistance that is offered under TANF. And unfortunately, as you can imagine, keeping that benefit up with the cost of living costs quite a bit of money. Well, given the situation we now find ourselves in a recession, increased demand on services, there will be most likely quite a caseload increase in basic cash assistance. And so it is necessary to reserve the majority of that TANF long-term reserve for that purpose, for the caseload increases that we can expect. And so the legislative declaration in Amendment L003 simply lays out the importance of providing, and you'll see in Amendment L004 in a second, a one-time payment of $500 to these families who are the lowest of the low income in Colorado. We're talking, $7,500 a year for a family of four. It will provide much needed assistance. That will be established in Amendment L004, but the Amendment L003 just has the legislative declaration concur with this new way to move forward. Ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L003? Senator Lundin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the bill sponsor. I just want to catch up to speed with the changes. Early on, it looked to me like up to 35% of funds were available for administration. I was a little concerned about that. Can you get us up to speed with these changes? How much of this is going to people and how much is going to administration?
Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to the Senator from Monument, the bill essentially, as we'll see, as it's changed through L003 and L004, which will be offered in a second, essentially everything goes to the recipients now. So the $500 one-time payment averages out with the number of people who are in the program to about $9 million. That is substantially less than the $90 million that's available in this fund, but it's still what I think we can reasonably deliver in financial relief to basic cash assistance recipients without jeopardizing the solvency of the fund given the caseload increases that we can expect.
Senator Lundin.
Thank you very much. One follow-on question. I appreciate that. 100% of the money going to people. The other question is, I want to be clear that this is still federal dollars flowing through is what we're talking about. This does not put additional pressure on the general fund, et cetera. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the senator from Monument. You have it 100% right. This is federal resources. It is the TANF long-term reserve. No general fund appropriation here.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L003? Seeing none, the motion is the adoption of L003. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. There is an amendment on the desk. Will the clerk please read Amendment L004?
Amendment L004 to Senate Bill 29 by Senator Moreno, Bill page 3, strike lines 20 through 27, strike pages 4 and 5, and substitute section.
Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Amendment L004. Colleagues, this is the second piece that I mentioned. This is the actual meat of the bill, not just the legislative declaration that you'll see very clearly on lines 10 and 11. Establish that one-time $500 payment that I referenced before. Again, this is such needed economic relief for these families, especially in the time that we find ourselves in now. So this, I think, very much responds to the current public health and economic crisis and delivers relief to these families.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the motion is the adoption of L004. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and Amendment L004 is adopted. Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 29? Seeing none, the motion is for the adoption of Senate Bill 29. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and Senate Bill 29 is adopted. Will the clerk please read the Title II, House Bill 1109?
House Bill 1109 by Representatives Van Winkle and Garnett and Senators Gardner and Todd concerning an extension of the income tax credit for employer contributions to Employee 529 qualified state tuition programs.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move House Bill 1109, and there is no committee report.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And screen people, I'll not be long, so don't go away. What this bill does is extend the income tax credit for employer contributions to the employee portion of 529 state tuition program plans for an additional 10 years. This is a good bill. It's a good bill for families, good bill for education, for higher education, and we ask for an aye vote.
Senator Todd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would just like to add that to date, there are over 122 businesses with 342 employees participating. So this is one of the ways to help people and help families educate and get their students' education invested in early on, and most importantly, keep the student loan debt down. Urge an aye vote on 1109. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1109? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of House Bill 1109. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and House Bill 1109 is adopted. Will the clerk please read the Title II, Senate Bill 41?
Senate Bill 41 by Senators Cook and Zenzing and Representative Garnett concerning parks passes for active members of the National Guard.
Senator Cook.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Senate Bill 41 and the Appropriations Committee report.
To the report.
The Appropriations Committee report appropriates the money.
Is there any further discussion on the appropriations report? Seeing none, the motion is the adoption of the appropriations report. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the report is adopted. To the bill, Senator Cook.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill allows the National Guard members to receive a park pass for the state parks. As you know, the National Guard has a dual mission. They get called out on emergencies here in the state. They're active duty right now on the COVID pandemic. But they also get sent to Iraq and Iran, or not Iran, but Iraq and Syria and some of those other countries over there. It's this darn mask. And but anyway, and then when they come back, they can't get into a state park. They're allowed to go on national parks, but they can't get into a state park without buying a pass. So this gives them a little bit of benefit to enter the pass. Now, the thing about it is there's an appropriations to it, appropriations for the park pass. But if the General Assembly does not give them appropriations, then that does not go into effect. So this year, I doubt that there'll be an appropriations, but maybe next year when times are better. So I'd ask for an aye vote on Senate Bill 41.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing no other discussion, the motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Bill 41. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and Senate Bill 41 is adopted. Will the clerk please read the title to House Bill 1302?
House Bill 1302 by Representative Lontin and Senator Danielson concerning changes to improve the protection services for at-risk adults.
Senator Danielson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move House Bill 1302, and there is no committee report.
There is an amendment on the desk. Will the clerk please read Amendment L005?
Amendment L005, House Bill 1302 by Senator Danielson and Maria Gross Bill, page 5, line 6, strike 24 hours.
Senator Danielson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Amendment L005 and ask for an aye vote. This was a request from the counties, basically just changing some paperwork requirements from one 24-hour period to one business day.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L005? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of Amendment L005. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. To the bill. Senator Danielson.
Thanks again, Madam Chair. I'll just be brief here. House Bill 1302, very simply put, makes at-risk adults much safer. We're closing some loopholes in the background checks process. We call it CAPS, which is even more important now due to COVID. Facilities and programs serving this population will need to hire additional staff, and it's very critical to ensure that the staff providing the care are not abusers. The bill also updates definitions, which tighten reporting requirements and clarifies the scope of caseworkers so they can focus on incidents of mistreatment and abuse. I'm sure a number of you are in the same situation as my family, where we're unable to come visit our family members in facilities. So we want to do our best to facilitate the sharing of information with law enforcement, facilities, family members, oversight agencies, et cetera, and really help people through this really difficult time that's been obviously further impacted by COVID. I'll just add, in my opinion, delaying these updates mean at-risk adults could suffer abuse and mistreatment if we don't address these gaps in our statutes. For those reasons and so many more, I urge an aye vote on House Bill 1302 to make sure that at-risk adults are safer in this very difficult time, and that the impacts of COVID don't further impact those most vulnerable in our communities. Thank you very much, everyone.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1302? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of House Bill 1302. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and House Bill 1302 is adopted.
Thank you.
Will the clerk please read the title to House Bill 1313?
House Bill 1313 by Representative Sullivan, Senator Todd, concerning the administration of ballots mailed to electors toward the end of the voting period.
Senator Todd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I move House Bill 1313 and the State Veterans and Military Affairs Committee report.
To the report.
To the report, what we did is we amended that the county clerk and recorder must deliver to the United States Postal Service any ballot that must be sent by mail within 2 business days after receiving a registration application or an update to a voter registration record that results in the issuance of an original or replacement mail ballot to the elector.
Is there any further discussion on the State Veterans and Military Affairs report? Seeing none, the motion is the adoption of the report. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the report is adopted. To the bill, Senator Todd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this bill specifies various requirements for county clerks concerning replacement ballots and voter registration changes towards the end of the voting period. The bill will increase state workload and expenditures for local governments beginning in 2021. And this is a bill that has been well vetted with all of the county clerks, the Secretary of State, and deals with making sure that those replacement ballots are made available to all voters.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1313? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of House Bill 1313. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and House Bill 1313 is adopted. Majority Leader Fenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move the committee rise and report.
The motion before the body is to rise and report. All of those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the committee will rise and report.
Senate will come to order. Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. President. The committee has had a number of bills under consideration. Will the clerk please read the report?
Mr. President, your committee will legal reports that on consideration of the following test bills being second read, there makes the following recommendations are on symbol 29 as amended, symbol 41 as amended, pass second read order, gross place calendar for third reading and final passage. House Bill 1109, House Bill 1302 as amended, House Bill 1313 as amended, pass second read order, revised place calendar for third reading and final passage. Senate Bill 007, Senate Bill 107, Senate Bill 55, Senate Bill 51 laid over until 6/3/20 and retaining their place on the calendar.
Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the report.
The motion is for the adoption of the committee of the whole report. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 34 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 1 excused, the committee of the whole report is adopted. Senate Bill 029 is amended. Senate Bill 041 is amended. Passed on second reading, order engrossed, placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. House Bill 1109, House Bill 1302 as amended. House Bill 1313 as amended. Passed on second reading and order revised and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. Senate Bill 007, Senate Bill 107, Senate Bill 055, Senate Bill 051 laid over until 6/3/2020 and retaining their place on the calendar. Consideration of resolutions. Will the clerk please read the title to Senate Joint Resolution 021? Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Joint Resolution 21 lay over until tomorrow, June 3rd.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Senate Joint Resolution 021 will be laid over until 6/3/2020 and retain its place on the calendar. Consideration of governor's appointments. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the consideration of governor's appointments, including the members of the Colorado State Fair Authority Board of Commissioners, lay over until Friday, June 5th.
The motion is to lay over the governor's appointments for Colorado State Fair Authority Board of Commissioners until 6/5/2020. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Those appointments will be laid over until Friday. Announcements. Sarah Cook.
Thank you, Mr. President. Moment of personal privilege, please.
Granted.
Thank you, Mr. President. So yesterday, during personal privilege, I heard many things, and a lot of people, several people came up and said, "Are you going to go down and say anything?" And Mr. President, I've learned over my 30 years in law enforcement to finally, in my 30 years it seems like down here, to count to 10 before I respond. And maybe I got to 9 by this morning. But I heard some things that were very troubling, very offensive yesterday. And I want to thank the good senator from Sterling, recognizing law enforcement, the hard work, the good work that they all do. The good senator from Sterling recognizes that one bad apple does not spoil the whole bunch. You know, yesterday when I heard that, I'm thinking, okay, there was one bad apple in Minnesota. And the comment was, one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. There was no specific agencies mentioned. Not one agency was called out. It was a general statement. So one bad apple must spoil all of law enforcement. Every agency in the country, every agency in the state must be bad apples. And I take that to be pretty offensive, because who makes up those agencies? The men and women of those agencies. And by saying that they're bad apples reflects on their communities. They work for their communities, and they do a good job for them. What I find offensive is I dare anyone to go to the Weld County Sheriff's Office and say there's systemic racism at the Weld County Sheriff's Office. Because that's what was said yesterday, that these agencies have systemic racism in them. It's the whole system. And I dare anyone to go there. Well, there must be lots of reports. If there's systemic racism at the Weld County Sheriff's Office, it'd be easy to find out. Justice Department, yeah, they would look into it. There's no reports of that. One bad apple doesn't spoil the whole bunch. I think about, well, let's say Arvada Police Department and the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. Are they full of racists? I asked the senators from that area to look into it and come back tomorrow, research it. Come back and find and tell me how many complaints there are on the Arvada Police Department and the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office of systemic racism. A little side note about Arvada. My mom happens to live in Arvada, and she had an encounter with the police a couple of months ago. My sister tried calling. She didn't answer, so she called the Arvada Police Department to check on her. And the Arvada police officer showed up and did just that, checked on her. She was okay. She didn't answer the phone because she was downstairs watching TV. Well, that officer, that mean, bully, racist officer, stayed there and talked to her for a little bit. He found out that her internet was out. So you know what that bully did? He went and reset her router, and then took the time to work with her to show her how that router works. So in case the internet goes out, she can fix it herself. Boy, that's a real bad apple. You know, there's going to be some bills coming out, anti-law enforcement bills. We need to correct that kind of behavior. We can't have those officers helping my mother out and reset her router. I wonder, one bad apple spoils a whole bunch. I wonder if that's true in Littleton, Inglewood, Cherry Hills. They must be full of racists. They must be full of bad apples. Because one bad apple spoils a whole bunch. One bad apple in Minnesota spoils every officer down here. I guess I wonder if one bad apple spoils the whole bunch in law enforcement, does one bad apple spoil the whole bunch in every other profession? It must. I hear a list of articles for teachers that have abused, sexually abused students. So I guess every teacher in this state, not just the district, in this state, and then throughout the country, must be bad apples. Because there's one, actually there's several, that have sexually assaulted students. So they must have several bad apples. I have here some articles regarding ministers that have abused children. You know, priests, preachers, going back 16 years. And I'm sure a lot of these priests and pastors had divinity degrees, but didn't stop them. So they must be bad apples as well. Every minister using that logic must be a bad apple. Again, I find what was said yesterday to be very offensive. You know, there are a lot of good cops out here, 99% of them, or more. But I read on the wall of the Capitol today, good cops equal dead cops. You know, we need to be careful with the kind of message we're sending in this building. Are we helping or are we hurting? Law enforcement is here to protect us, and they do a darn good job of it. So to say that one bad apple in Minnesota reflects on the agencies and the men and women of this state is just wrong. Mr. President, I appreciate the time.
Announcements. Senator Pedersen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for a moment of personal privilege.
Granted.
Thank you. As a white member, I feel obligated to come up and respond because this does not just fall on our members of color. What you're saying is that you're exactly right. Teachers who have molested children, who have taken advantage of that position of power and taken advantage of kids in this vulnerable position, that does not reflect every teacher. The difference is in what the advocates are asking for is that we hold those people accountable. What we're asking for is that the small percentage of police who take advantage of their power, who unfortunately time and time again have hurt people of color, especially black men, and sometimes killed them, that we also hold them accountable. As you mentioned, the priests who also have molested children. That does not reflect every priest. But we have also advocated to change our laws, to change what we do in this building and across the country, to hold them accountable too, and that is all they are asking for. That we recognize abuse of power when it happens. As our senator from Aurora said, when you see something wrong, say it. And in our position, when we see something wrong, we get to actually change it. So, of course, we can stand with our law enforcement and also stand against the abuse of power and the racism that exists in some law enforcement members. So this has been a very difficult situation for all of us to witness because of the deep-rooted anxiety and anger and sorrow that exists because of people that have lost family members and because of abuse that they've seen. I had the opportunity to work with an officer who was she was a Denver police officer. And she talked about, as a black woman, how powerless she felt because she would see abuses every day on the job. And she felt like she went to discuss it, went to the higher-ups. They didn't want to hear what she had to say. And in fact, she was told, I didn't get all the way to this position to be taken down by addressing these cases. So that's all. We're just saying, we're not saying that all people who are in law enforcement are racist, that they abuse their power. We all rely on them to keep our communities safe. Let's make sure that, like the teachers that you gave examples of, the priests, the small percentage of them are held accountable in those positions of power when it's abused, and also addressing that systematic racism that exists that lets them get away with it. So that's our call and what the senator here asked us to do. Thank you.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Request a moment of personal privilege.
Granted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to say thank you to former Denver Mayor Wellington Webb. I heard Mayor Webb speak this morning on one of the local news broadcasts, and he was bringing, I thought, a really balanced perspective to this heated debate, protest movement. And I appreciated him explaining that reforms have occurred here in Colorado, I think especially here in Denver, and specifically with the horrid hold, the knee used to the neck that we saw in the video from Minnesota. And that isn't allowed, at least here in Denver, and if I understood the mayor correctly, that might be a statewide change. I really appreciate that because it was a clear reminder that local or state governments aren't the same everywhere. And I think Colorado, traditionally, we've been ahead of the curve on a lot of those reforms. So I really appreciated the mayor's perspective on that and just wanted to say so publicly. Thank you, Mayor. But I also wanted to take a moment to thank, and I hope that all of us, I believe that all of us will share this opinion, the men and women of the Colorado State Patrol who serve on the Executive Protection Unit here in the Capitol. Their primary responsibility is to defend, protect the governor and the lieutenant governor and the treasurer, those statewide officers who are officed here in the Capitol, but also 100 of us. And in my 10 years inside the glass, and a few years before that outside the glass, I have just become so impressed with the men and women of the Colorado State Patrol. And they're in a unique environment. We understand that Washington, D.C. is this designated place that's not a state, but they're in between Virginia and Maryland. And it's neutral ground for all 50 states, all citizens to go and be in the midst of our federal government. And Capitol Hill here in Denver is similar. Our desks are representative of 35 different distinct geographic places in Colorado. Mine represents northern and western Douglas County, and yours, the district and the people who you represent. But here on Capitol Hill, the State Patrol has this awkward sometimes and unique responsibility to protect elected officials and public, the people who come to our capital and want to participate, witness their state government in action. It's a lot like, I guess, Washington, D.C., but much smaller. And right across the street in any direction, it's the city and county of Denver. This building is in the city and county of Denver, but law enforcement here on the Capitol complex, that isn't necessarily DPD, that's the Colorado State Patrol. And as these activities in and around the Capitol, the protests, the marches, and then I think really a sign of anarchy, people who want maybe all of us gone, all government gone, and the destruction that came out of those individuals and those groups. The interaction between the Colorado State Patrol and the Denver Police Department, maybe that gets blurred on TV. Maybe that gets blurred as reporters talk about it. But when I come in, and I hope you share this opinion, Mr. President, and all members, when I come into this building and I see the troopers the next morning and they're in uniform and they say, "Good morning, Senator," and they have a smile on their face, it just reminds me of the challenge that they have to work in this little tiny island of democracy that represents the state of Colorado and all 5.8 million or so people who live here. All of the people who live in all of these 35 Senate districts.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Yes, sir.
Members and guests, the Minority Leader is speaking.
Thank you, Mr.
Take your
President.
sidebar conversations outside of the chamber. Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. All of us in Colorado, all of us who are blessed to serve in this chamber, we are so well defended, so well protected, so well represented as a state by the men and women of the Colorado State Patrol, and in particular the Executive Protection Unit. I would just ask you, Mr. President, members, as you see one of those troopers, as you see them as you leave the building today, as you come in tomorrow morning, I'm sure you already do. I'm not presuming that you wouldn't do this, but say thank you and God bless you. Thank you for putting your life on the line to protect us and this beautiful building that belongs to we the people. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request a moment of personal privilege.
Granted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, colleagues, to my good colleague, the senator from Greeley, I love it when you get fired up, because I know that means that you care. And honestly, I wish you would have been that angry in denouncing the murder of a man on video. You asked that we not be painting everyone with one broad brush. And then you, in your comment, pointed to some graffiti and painted the peaceful demonstrations with that language and rhetoric. Members, I ask that as we debate these policies, that we be consistent. We'll have the opportunity in the days ahead to have real policy conversations around what integrity should look like and what accountability should look like. But let us be consistent. Thank you. And with that, Mr. President, I have an announcement.
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate Finance Committee, we will be meeting upon adjournment in 15 minutes at 11:35. We have 4 bills under consideration. I'm going to change the order of the bills that we will be hearing, and so I want to make you aware of that now. We will start with Senate Bill 210, followed by Senate Committee Resolution 001, followed by Senate Bill 211, followed by Senate Bill 207. Thank you very much.
Senator Foot.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have an announcement about Senate State Veterans and Military Affairs Committee. We will be meeting upon adjournment as well in the Old Spring Court Chamber. There's 3 bills currently on the calendar. However, Senate Bill 190 is going to be laid over. So we will just hear Senate Bill 212 and Senate Bill 205. So Senate Bill 212 and 205 upon adjournment in the Old Spring Court Chamber with State Affairs. Thank you.
Senator Foot.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have an additional announcement about State Affairs Committee. We will also be laying over Senate Bill 205. So we will be hearing one bill. That's Senate Bill 212 in the State Affairs Committee. Thank you.
Message from the House.
The House is postponed indefinitely. Senate Bill 41, 46, 178, 151, 25, 38, 36, and 8. The bill is returned herewith. The House is laid over Senate Bill 46, 56, and 87 until December 31st, 2020. Deeming it lost, the bills are returned herewith.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, we are going to keep the desk open, get these committee reports read across and whatnot. So, Mr. President, I move the Senate recess until 2 p.m. today.
You have heard the motion. The motion is that the Senate stand in a recess until 1400 today. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed no. The ayes have it, and the Senate will stand in a recess until 1400.